What if the person you thought you left behind turned out to be the one thing you never really got over? Have you ever believed, truly believed, that you made the right choice, only to have life turn around and show you, in one quiet, devastating moment, just how wrong you were? That's what happened to Marcus. He was out celebrating what he thought was his upgrade, dressed in his best suit, young girlfriend by his side, soaking in the glow of everything he thought proved he'd won. But then he saw her, Elise, his ex-wife, the woman he once walked away from. And she wasn't broken, she wasn't bitter, she was glowing. And not just from the city lights, but from something deeper, a kind of peace, of power, of joy that he had never been able to give her. And the man beside her wasn't just anyone. He was the most respected CEO in the city, the kind of man Marcus had spent his whole life trying to become. Now, let me ask you, how do you come back from that? Because this isn't just a story about a dinner or an ex. It's about the moment you realize maybe the one thing you thought didn't matter anymore was everything. Trust me, this one's going to stay with you. He watched, frozen in a haze of jealousy and disbelief, as Elise walked in arm with the city's most powerful CEO, Lucas Zhang, a name every boardroom in the country feared and respected. This wasn't just a story about running into an ex. This was the ultimate reminder that what Marcus had lost wasn't just a woman, it was his entire illusion of victory. Let's set the scene. The night air in Manhattan shimmered with the scent of money and saffron oil. Perched atop the 72nd floor of the Lenox International Tower, the restaurant gleamed like a crystal box above the pulse of New York below. Streams of headlights wove through the avenues like veins of light. But up here, there was only the soft chime of baccarat cutlery and the quiet murmur of the city's elite. Marcus Hale felt a wave of pride swell in his chest. He adjusted the cuffs of his custom-tailored Salvatore Moretti suit, the silk grazing the edge of his new Colombe timepiece. This was his world, built brick by expensive brick on the back of cold real estate moves and a predator's understanding of human ambition. Across the table, Emily Rhodes laughed, a sound like wind chimes that always seemed perfectly timed to catch the attention of the other diners. She was 25, nearly 12 years younger than Marcus, with flawless, poreless skin and that sharp-eyed beauty bred for social media. She tilted her phone, catching the reflection of skyline lights in her wine glass. "Isn't this just perfect, baby?" she cooed, fingers already dancing across the screen. Rooftop vibes, luxury life, date night, best boyfriend. Marcus offered his polished, well-practiced smile, one that didn't quite touch his eyes. "Only the best for you, Emily." He'd met her 6 months after his divorce from Elise was finalized. Emily was a breath of uncomplicated air. She didn't question him. She didn't fall into those long, reflective silences he'd grown to hate. She adored his success, praised his wealth, and, most importantly, made him feel like the powerful man he always wanted to be. She was the proof that he'd made the right choice. That walking away from Elise wasn't a mistake, it was an upgrade. A strategic move, letting go of dead weight. It was an upgrade, a calculated shedding of what no longer served him. Marcus scanned the room like a monarch observing his court. There, a hedge fund manager he'd closed a deal with. Over there, a logistics mogul he'd once outbid for a Manhattan property. He nodded subtly, a quiet display of his social dominance. And then his gaze locked onto a figure near the panoramic window. And suddenly, the world tilted. It was Elise. Not his Elise anymore, just Elise. She stood with her back to the room, outlined against the glittering New York skyline. He would have recognized that silhouette in a crowd of 1,000, the delicate slope of her shoulders, the elegant curve of her neck. Her hair was pinned up in a classic twist, revealing the nape he once kissed every morning. She wore a sleek navy dress, nothing like Emily's glittering, body-hugging number. Elise didn't need flash. Her power was quieter, more devastating. Subtle, self-assured, something unfamiliar twisted in his gut more than surprise. It was irritation, a breach. This was his domain, his celebration lap. What the hell was she doing here? Elise had always hated upscale places like this. She used to call them lifeless. She preferred noisy noodle bars in the East Village, where flavors exploded and seats wobbled. "Babe?" Emily's voice cut through his fog. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," he muttered, tighter than intended. He shifted his gaze back to Emily's radiant face, but the imprint of Elise wouldn't leave his mind. His eyes kept drifting back to that windowside table. She wasn't alone. A man sat across from her. Marcus couldn't make out his face. Just the tailored shoulders of a charcoal suit and a head of salt and pepper hair, impeccably groomed. They weren't speaking much. They didn't need to. The quiet between them was companionable, natural. So different from the rehearsed laughs and filtered conversation at Marcus' own table. Then Elise laughed, soft, unforced. The kind of laugh Marcus hadn't heard from her in years, not since the days when ambition hadn't yet devoured him. A surge of resentment flared. Who was this man? Some bland finance exec? A gallery owner from one of her charity events? Marcus instinctively measured him, an old habit from the boardroom. The suit was clearly custom, but that didn't mean much. Elise never cared about wealth or influence. And yet, there was something about the man's presence that made Marcus uneasy. He reminded himself that had always been one of their core conflicts. Elise had been content in her world of architectural heritage, preservation work, and obscure academic lectures. She never understood the hunger that drove him. "Is that your ex-wife?" Emily narrowed her eyes, following his gaze. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Marcus flinched. The word ex-wife in Emily's mouth felt like something torn open. "Yeah," he replied tightly. Emily's eyes sparkled with intrigue. "Wow, small world." She tilted her head. "She looks different." "She looks the same," Marcus snapped, then immediately regretted the sharpness in his tone. Emily raised an eyebrow, studying Elise. "No, I mean, she looks more refined. I always pictured her as more plain, based on what you told me." Marcus didn't respond. He had carefully shaped the version of Elise that suited his post-divorce narrative, a timid, unambitious woman who clung to routine and ideals, who couldn't keep up with his pace, a weight he had to shed in order to soar. But seeing her here, glowing quietly in the presence of a man like that, it shattered the illusion he had spent years curating. Then he saw the man reach out and take her hand. Simple, effortless. But it sent a shockwave through Marcus. He had held that hand. He had once placed a ring on that finger. The memory slammed into him, vivid, sensory, a ghost of her skin against his palm, the fine bones, the cool touch of someone who once belonged to him. Emily placed a hand on his arm. "Don't stress, babe, you definitely traded up," she said with a wink. It was meant to reassure, but it only made his skin crawl. The dinner went on, but the Wagyu steak tasted like cardboard. The champagne was flat. Every laugh from Emily grated on his nerves. Every brush of her fingers felt offbeat. His focus tunneled back to the windowside table. He was watching a film in a foreign language, one where Elise was starring in a life he no longer understood. And then the moment came, the one that would split his life clean in two, before and after. The silver-haired man rose slowly, towering with quiet power. He stepped around the table and stood beside Elise. She looked up at him, something unspoken passing between them. Marcus's pulse pounded in his ears. No, it couldn't be. The man finally turned just enough for the light to catch his face, and recognition hit Marcus like a punch to the chest. It was Lucas Zhang. Not a Lucas Zhang. The Lucas Zhang. The Chinese-American CEO who transformed global logistics and fintech overnight. A billionaire whose reach extended from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. Just last month, Forbes ran a feature on him titled "The Quiet Force of the Future." His wealth dwarfed Marcus's portfolio like a mountain over a pebble. Lucas Zhang didn't just belong in the rooms Marcus dreamed of entering, he built those rooms. And now he was standing beside Elise, calm, assured, not proposing, just existing, with her. There was no need for grand gestures. His mere presence at her side sent a message loud enough to silence the entire restaurant. Conversations faltered, heads turned. Marcus sat still, heart thudding like a war drum. Lucas leaned slightly toward Elise, said something that made her laugh, an easy, unrehearsed sound that cracked something deep in Marcus's chest. She looked up at Lucas with a quiet softness, her eyes glinting in the low light. She looked at Peace. Emily gasped beside him, her phone now forgotten in her lap. "Marcus, that's Lucas Zhang. That's Lucas Zhang. And he's here, with her." Marcus didn't respond. Couldn't. He sat frozen in his seat, drowning in the brutal clarity of the moment. This wasn't about love. It wasn't about wealth. It was about power. The careful hierarchy Marcus had constructed for himself, where he was the dominant one, the one who had moved on, had just been obliterated in a blink. He wasn't the one who'd upgraded. He wasn't the one on top. He was the man who discarded a rare diamond and was now forced to watch as someone far greater recognized it, wore it like a crown. And for the first time in his adult life, surrounded by tailored suits, high-end dishes, and a woman who praised his success on Instagram, Marcus Hale felt like the poorest man in the room. The diamond on her left hand felt impossibly heavy. It sat there, foreign and luminous, like a celestial object not yet settled into her gravitational pull. Last night felt unreal, beautiful, overwhelming, and terrifying all at once. The soft hush of the restaurant, the gravity in Lucas's voice, the quiet dominance of his presence. She brewed coffee, her grounding ritual. The bold aroma of her single-origin beans filled the warm corners of her kitchen. She had said yes. Yes to Lucas Jean, with his gentle certainty and steady eyes. In that moment, it had felt effortless, inevitable. He didn't see her as some polished prize. He saw her as a partner. He listened when she spoke about the foundation flaws in a 19th-century brownstone cornice, with the same intent focus he gave to a Fortune 100 merger briefing. But even as the steam from her mug curled up like soft ribbon, Elise felt a tremor deep within her chest, small but unmistakable. A voice she thought she had quieted whispered from the shadows of memory, "Are you sure you're not just a project again?" It wasn't mistrust in Lucas, it was mistrust in herself, in her ability to believe that someone as extraordinary as him could love not a version of her, not the accomplished architect or the survivor, but the whole woman, with her scars, her setbacks, and her self-doubt. What if this happiness was borrowed time? What if she failed again, not because of who Lucas was, but because of who she feared she might still be underneath the strength she wore like armor? But now, in the stillness of morning, the ghosts returned, soft, familiar doubts. What could a billionaire CEO possibly want with someone like you? An architect who prefers conservation grants and dusty planning documents over champagne galas? The doubts had a voice. It sounded like Marcus. She sank into the linen armchair by the window, clutching her mug, still warm. She couldn't stop the image from surfacing, his face last night. She'd only seen him briefly as she and Lucas made their way out, surrounded by congratulations and quiet stares. But in that moment, she saw Marcus, frozen in place, mouth parted, that familiar ego behind his eyes suddenly fractured. Beside him, the young woman looked equally stunned, her phone suspended midair like a misplaced shield. And it hadn't hurt, not the way it once would have. It was like looking at a stranger wearing a face she used to know. The Marcus she loved or thought she loved was long gone, erased over time by silences, by small humiliations, by disinterest masquerading as ambition. Flashback, 2 years earlier. Their home in the West Village, all glass and angles and tension. The air hung thick with things left unsaid. Marcus was late, again. Elise had made his favorite, grilled miso salmon, wild rice, pickled radish. The scent had faded now, overtaken by cold air and disappointment. She sat at the long oak table they'd found on their honeymoon in Copenhagen, her finger tracing the grain. She had just gotten the news. The city had approved her proposal to lead the restoration of the Astoria Hall, a landmark she'd poured her entire thesis and career into. She was ready to burst with it. And then the door opened, almost midnight. The faint scent of perfume that wasn't hers drifted in first. Her eyes followed him as he walked in, his suit jacket slung carelessly over one arm. His presence filled the room, but he barely seemed aware of her. He didn't notice the untouched food, didn't notice the hopeful, nervous look on her face. "Long day?" she asked gently. He grunted, loosening his tie and heading straight to the liquor cabinet. "Exhausting. I have some news," she began softly. "Great," he said, pouring himself a heavy pour of bourbon. He finally looked at her, but his gaze didn't connect. Just glassy, preoccupied eyes. "Marcus, it's about the Astoria Hall project. I got it. They approved the proposal. I'm the lead architect." He paused, his drink hovering halfway to his lips. He blinked, processing her words like he would a change in market data or a last-minute zoning notice. "Oh, right. That old building thing. That's nice. Good for you." "Nice. Good for you." The words landed with the weight of indifference. Her career-defining victory, the dream she had pursued for years, was treated like an afterthought. "It's a big deal, Marcus," she said, voice tightening. It's a registered landmark. I'll be working with the city council directly. I know, he waved her off, already downing the drink. But it's not exactly gonna pay the mortgage, is it? It's a passion project, she said quietly. A hobby, he corrected, dismissively. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was heavy. It pressed into her chest with the weight of realization. Elise's fingers curled around the edge of her chair, grounding herself. Her eyes were stinging, but she didn't let the tears fall. Not yet. Not here. She had once believed that love meant compromise, but this wasn't compromise. This was erasure. For a long time she had convinced herself that Marcus was just stressed, that his dismissiveness was temporary, a symptom of a high-stakes job, but deep down she had known. The erosion hadn't started tonight. It had been happening slowly, like water over stone, wearing her down until only fragments of the woman she was remained. And that was when she knew. It wasn't some scandalous reveal, a lipstick stain, a hidden phone. It was this slow erosion, the quiet, constant way he diminished everything she cared about. Her work? A hobby. Her friends? Dull. Academic. Her happiness? A symptom of laziness. He didn't scream. He didn't throw things. He just slowly made her feel like nothing she was mattered unless it reflected back on him. And then came the affair, discovered by accident, a tab left open on his laptop. But by then, she wasn't even surprised. The infidelity wasn't the betrayal. It was just the proof. The confirmation that Marcus had become someone who craved external validation more than real connection. Someone who couldn't see her unless she gleamed under spotlight. And when she wouldn't be his prize, he found someone else who would. The divorce was cold, swift, surgical. He thought himself generous, left her the small apartment, added a financial settlement that he probably categorized as miscellaneous on his spreadsheets. But what he really left behind was something Elise didn't miss. What Marcus never realized was that he had given her the one thing she needed most, her freedom, the freedom to exhale, to become. Flashback. Elise took a slow, steady breath. The memory still lingered, like a bruise fading under the skin. Reclaiming herself had felt like restoring a ruined building. She had to inspect the cracks, clear away the debris of Marcus's dismissals and expectations, and rebuild, brick by brick, a life of her own making. That new foundation became her work. She poured her pain, her drive, her vision into wood, steel, and stone. She won awards, she gave lectures, she became known, not just as an architect but as a voice. She met Lucas not at a gala, but on site, at the construction zone for Astoria Hall, the historic theater she was restoring. He'd shown up unannounced, dressed in dusty jeans and a linen shirt, work boots scuffed from the field. He didn't introduce himself as a mogul, just Lucas, someone passionate about urban heritage. They talked for hours. Walking between scaffoldings, she explained the challenges of foundation reinforcement, the original plaster's chemical makeup, the historical design flaws that required modern adaptation. And unlike Marcus, he didn't just listen, he heard. He asked questions, thoughtful ones. He didn't condescend. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to diminish her expertise. He marveled at it. Their connection grew slowly. Lunches turned into long afternoon walks. Debates over architecture led to shared books, shared silences. Not once did he make her feel like she was beneath him. His fortune was a detail, not a definition. He was a man who had built an empire but still found joy in learning, in details, in people. A soft ping from her phone pulled her back. A message from Lucas. "Good morning, my brilliant fiancé. I hope you slept well. I'm still floating. Are you okay? I know last night was a lot." She read it twice, heart folding inward and expanding all at once. His sincerity was like gravity, solid, real, grounding. So unlike Marcus's oblivious ego, she smiled and began to type, her fingers steady. "Now I'm more than okay," she typed. "I'm just trying to figure out how to work a laptop with this miniature star on my finger. Good morning to you too." She hit send and looked down at the ring again. It wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't a cage. It wasn't a symbol of possession. It was a promise. A promise from a man who had seen the foundation of her life, admired its architecture, and wanted to build within it, not demolish it. And in that moment, she understood something crystal clear. The ghost of Marcus Hale no longer had a voice. She had evicted him. Completely. Her past was a historical site, worth visiting, worth learning from, but not worth living in. Her future was a brand new blueprint. and it was time to build. The 24 hours after that night felt like a slow-motion crash for Marcus. He moved through his life mechanically, everything skewed, as if seen through a windshield splintered by impact. He had woken up in his expansive penthouse, the sheets still smelling faintly of Emily's saccharine perfume. She was sprawled across the bed, one arm over her face, her phone cracked on the nightstand from where she dropped it in last night's chaos. He remembered her voice in the car, still shrill in his mind. "Can you believe it, Elise, with Lucas Zhang? How the hell did that happen? I mean, seriously, she must be a world-class gold digger. You dodged a bullet, babe." He hadn't replied, just stared blankly out the window while his mind unraveled into rage, shame, and something far more dangerous: regret. Now, in his sleek corner office, triple monitors glowing with reports he couldn't read, all he could see was Elise's face. That radiant smile, the kind of joy he had once convinced himself she was incapable of. But last night had proven that was a lie he needed to believe to excuse how completely he had failed her. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Hale, your 10 o'clock with the Helix board is here." "Delay them 15, he barked, cutting the line. He turned toward the skyline, gripping the arms of his leather chair. He had always been the winner. In school, in business, in life. Ending things with Elise had felt like another victory at the time, another trade-up. He'd told himself she wasn't enough, so he replaced her with someone shinier, younger, easier to manage. But the truth had arrived. In high heels, beside a CEO whose mere presence silenced a room, and Marcus Hale had never felt smaller. She had once been proof of his dominance, but now Elise was proof of how far he had fallen behind. Lucas Zhang didn't play the same game as Marcus. He didn't even play on the same field. Marcus had spent his life scaling the corporate mountain, only to look up and realize Elise was already on the moon. What haunted him most wasn't love. It was power. In their marriage, he had always held the cards. The money, the reputation, the spotlight. He controlled the tempo of their life, the events they attended, the friends they kept, the future they built. He made her feel small because her smallness made him feel big. It was toxic, subtle, and he hadn't understood the sickness until it was gone. Now she was standing beside a man who could buy and sell Hale Enterprises without checking his account balance. A man whose name didn't just open doors, it built them. Elise, his quiet, once overlooked ex-wife, now had more influence than he could ever touch. It burned. He opened his laptop, searched Lucas Zhang, page after page of glowing praise. Forbes, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal. He wasn't looking for success. He was looking for failure, a flaw, a scandal, something to even the scales, but there was none. Tech prodigy, sold his first platform at 23, built a logistics empire, now shifting focus to global cultural preservation. Widowed a decade ago, wife died of cancer. No kids, private, philanthropic. Even his tragedy was polished, noble, sympathetic. Marcus clenched his jaw. He clicked into the Jean Foundation site, scanned until he found the Cultural Projects tab. There she was, Elise Bennett, lead architectural historian and restoration director. Her photo stared back at him, composed, brilliant, proud. A doctor now, an expert. Her biography was filled with degrees, keynote lectures, peer-reviewed articles, international recognition, awards, dozens, ones he never even knew she'd won. He scrolled further. Pictures of her in a hard hat at the Astoria site, pointing at schematics, leading a team of engineers. This wasn't the woman he'd left. The woman he remembered was meek, overly academic, too soft. But this woman was a storm. A terrifying thought flickered across his mind, then rooted deep. Had she always been this woman? Had he simply refused to see her? His phone buzzed, text from Emily, a string of hearts and shopping bag emojis. "Thinking we need retail therapy to celebrate your lucky escape." He stared at it and for the first time felt nothing but irritation. The emptiness of it, the plastic surface of it all. It suffocated him. He thought back to the late nights with Elise, debating architecture, philosophy, ethics. Conversations that once lit him up before he declared them a waste of time. She had challenged him, stimulated him, and he had shut her down. The rest of the day blurred. Meetings passed in static. He barked at his board, snapped at his assistant for the wrong mineral water. Nothing soothed the crawling in his chest. By that evening, Emily was at the mirror, draped in options. "Should I wear the Valentino or the Chanel?" she asked, holding up two dresses Marcus couldn't tell apart. I'm not going, he said flatly. She turned, makeup pristine, her smile cracking. What do you mean you're not going? We told the curator we'd be there. This is important for my brand. I have work, he lied. Work, she scoffed. You've been scrolling through pictures of your ex-wife and her billionaire fiancé all day. It's pathetic. That word hit like a slap. He stood, every muscle locked tight. What did you just say? Emily didn't flinch. This time she met him head-on. I said it's pathetic. You told me she was boring. You said she was dead weight. Now she walks into one event with Lucas Zhang and you're unraveling. Her voice rose, sharp and cold. Is it because she's with someone richer than you? Is that what breaks you? The words cut deep, because they were true. It wasn't just about wealth. Lucas had recognized something in Elise. Something Marcus never bothered to. He'd seen her mind, her talent, her worth, and celebrated it. He'd shown the world and Marcus the value of everything Marcus once belittled. You don't know what you're talking about, Marcus growled. I know I'm your girlfriend, Emily fired back. And I know I've become invisible to you, because you're still watching her. What am I, Marcus? A placeholder? A prop you use to make yourself feel important? He had no answer, because in that instant, he knew. Emily was a bandage, a temporary fix slapped over something festering and deep. And now that bandage had peeled away, and all he could see was the infection beneath. Get out, he said, voice low. What? I said get out. Go to your event. I don't care. I need space. Emily stared at him, eyes glistening with tears, not of sorrow but betrayal. Her lip trembled, her hand clutching her purse as she backed away. Fine, but when you finally get over this ego spiral, don't expect me to be here. She slammed the door. The sound echoed, sharp and final, against the marble and glass of his penthouse. And Marcus? He was alone, utterly, undeniably alone, with all his accolades, all his status, and the yawning emptiness inside him. An emptiness shaped exactly like Elise. He sat back on the bed, staring into nothing. The so-called victor of a game he finally understood he never knew how to play. And he had lost, spectacularly. 2 weeks passed. For Marcus, they weren't weeks. They were a slow, boiling obsession. Work slipped. Emily's presence was reduced to cold one-word texts and long, passive-aggressive silences. And then he snapped. He hired a private investigator. It was petty. He knew it. He told himself it was precaution, ensuring Elise wasn't being deceived. But deep down, he wasn't protecting anyone. He was searching for ammunition. Something, anything. A flaw in Lucas Zhang that could break the spell. But the report came back too clean. Lucas Zhang was exactly what he appeared to be. Brilliant, strategic, demanding, but fair, and committed to his philanthropic work with relentless sincerity. The only faint blemish? A redacted entry involving a hostile acquisition nearly 15 years ago, some startup swallowed by Zhang's expanding empire. The founder lost everything. Ruthless, perhaps, but legal. Not the smoking gun Marcus needed. And suddenly, it wasn't enough. He couldn't just observe anymore. He had to see her. He fabricated a reason, some unresolved legal issue from the divorce. A contractual clause his lawyers needed clarification on. It was weak, desperate. But it was enough. She agreed to meet him, but not at a cafe, not on neutral ground. She chose the site, her turf. The address was the old Federal Archive Museum in Brooklyn, where she was consulting on a new preservation initiative. A place Marcus hadn't stepped foot in since a grade school field trip. She was in the city for a week, leading a restoration survey for the Zhang Cultural Foundation. He found her beneath the grand stone archway, standing beside a carved lion statue weathered by time. The summer air was dense and warm, heavy with dust and history. She wore simple linen trousers and a pale blue shirt, sleeves rolled up. Her hair was pinned back, and she held a leather-bound notebook as she spoke with a museum curator in soft, fluent French, gesturing to the fading friezes above them. When she noticed him, her expression didn't shift. Not with anger, not even sadness. Just quiet recognition. Stillness. Marcus, she said, her voice calm, balanced. She excused herself from the curator and turned toward him fully. Thank you for meeting me, he said, the words sounding painfully small in the echoing corridor. You look well? I am well, she replied evenly, not as a courtesy, as a fact. You said there was some kind of legal issue. He launched into his story, something about a tax misfiling tied to their joint trust account. A flimsy excuse. She listened, silent, unreadable. When he finished, she nodded once. All right, forward the documents to my attorney. Same contact as before. She turned, ready to return to her work. Wait, his voice cracked with urgency. That's not why I really came. She stopped. I figured as much, she said, gaze unwavering. The walls inside him cracked. This man, he began. Lucas Zhang, do you even know who he is? What he's capable of? A faint smile flickered on her lips, not amused, not angry, just tired, knowing. I know exactly who he is, Marcus. He's the man who saw potential in a forgotten opera house and helped bring it back to life. He's the man who reads my research, not to impress me, but because he respects it. He's a man who doesn't try to shrink me to fit his ego. Her voice never wavered. Every word was scalpel sharp. She was naming their past, not to punish, but to finally bury it. Kind and decent, Marcus scoffed, scrambling for ground. That's all it takes now? Marcus reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone like a weapon. I did some digging, he said. 15 years ago, Lucas Zhang destroyed a man named Daniel Choi, ran a startup called PulseNet. He stared at her, waiting, wanting to see it. Shock, doubt, even fear. But Elise just looked at him, and then she looked sorry. I know all about Daniel, she said softly. Lucas told me on our third date. It's the one thing in his career he regrets. He was young, hungry, too aggressive, and he made the wrong call. Her voice didn't waver. He spent 5 years helping Daniel rebuild, mentored him personally, invested in his new company. They're friends now. Daniel and his wife are coming to our wedding. The ground vanished beneath Marcus. His evidence, the dirt he hoped would unravel her trust, it had disintegrated in his hands. And now he was just exposed. What are you doing, Marcus? Elise asked. Her voice was quiet but unshakable. Why are you trying to sabotage something that has nothing to do with you? I'm not, he stammered. I'm trying to protect you. The words were poison in his mouth. No, she said, stepping toward him. And just like that, the dynamic flipped. She had the high ground, not in anger, in clarity. You're not protecting me. You're trying to rewrite the story, to cling to this version where you were the hero, and I was just the collateral. You can't stand that I didn't just survive after you. I thrived. Her eyes didn't leave his. You can't stand that a man you secretly admire recognized the very things in me that you tried to bury. My voice, my passion, my worth. He stared, stunned. Every word struck with surgical precision. And then she said what he hadn't been able to say himself. The power imbalance in our marriage? I let you have it. I made myself small so you could feel big. I dimmed my light so you could shine. That was my mistake. Her voice grew firmer. And I will never, ever make myself small again. Not for anyone. She looked at him. One final time. And this time, all the emotion in her gaze was replaced by something heavier. Finality. I truly hope you find what you're looking for, Marcus, but you need to understand something. It's not with me, and it never will be again. Please don't contact me, unless it's through legal channels. Goodbye. She turned and walked away, back into the afternoon light, back into her world, leaving Marcus standing alone in the echo of ancient stone and dust, surrounded by the ghosts of architects, visionaries, and now the debris of his own making. He had come here to challenge her, to uncover something dark, to reassert control. Instead, he had been stripped bare, and now he stood with nothing but the one truth he had spent years running from. Claire, no, Elise, had never been the problem. He was. The Pan-Atlantic Heritage Design Awards were the most prestigious event on the architectural calendar. Held at the glass-walled Summit Pavilion in Manhattan, it was a night of opulence, press coverage, and legacy. Tonight, the spotlight wasn't on innovation, it was on preservation. And the front-runner for the grand prize? The team behind the Astoria Opera House restoration. Elise's work. Her life's work. Marcus wasn't invited. But access was simple when your checkbook could buy silence. He was there, not to support, to sabotage. His encounter with Elise at the Brooklyn site had obliterated every illusion. And what grew in the ashes wasn't regret, it was vengeance. If he couldn't have her, if he couldn't be the hero in her story, he would become the villain. He had spent weeks gathering dirt, found former employees from PulseNet, paid them generously to twist half-truths into a damning portrait of Lucas Zhang. Then he handed it all to a scandal-chasing online tabloid, known for burning reputations overnight. The article was set to publish at exactly 9 p.m., right as Elise would take the stage. His plan was cruelly simple. cause a scandal so public, so damaging, that it would cast a shadow over her triumph and her fiancé. He watched her from the shadows of the back row. She was radiant. The deep emerald silk gown swept around her like water, a Vietnamese designer's masterpiece. She wore almost no jewelry, except the ring. That ring. It caught the room's light and bent it toward her. Lucas stood beside Elise, not behind her, not in front of her, but as her equal. Together they moved through the room, exchanging handshakes and conversations with designers, historians, and international donors. They weren't just a couple, they were a force. Their strength didn't stem from wealth alone, it came from shared vision and a foundation of unwavering respect. Marcus watched them, the bitterness rising in his throat like bile. Emily had finally left the week before. Her parting shot? "You're in love with a memory, Marcus. I can't compete with that." He was alone now, truly. The awards ceremony began, projects from across the world highlighted in a parade of craftsmanship and legacy. Then came the final announcement. The lights dimmed. The presenter, an iconic Parisian architect, spoke with reverence. A restoration not only of structure but of spirit, a project that gives voice to history. The Astoria Opera House, led by the remarkable Dr. Elise Marlowe. Her photo, smiling in a hard hat on site, filled the stage's massive screens. Applause erupted. "And we are honored," the presenter added, "to be joined by the project's chief benefactor, a man whose vision for cultural preservation rivals his global innovation, Mr. Lucas Zhang." As Elise and Lucas walked toward the stage, Marcus's phone vibrated. 9 p.m. The article was live. He watched with twisted anticipation as phones throughout the ballroom began to light up. A wave of whispers spread, like a slow-blooming firestorm. On stage, Elise accepted the heavy bronze sculpture. She stepped to the microphone, radiant, poised. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm. This is an incredible honor, a project born of collaboration and care." She paused. Something had shifted. She felt it, the room's subtle shift in energy. She glanced at Lucas. He gave a quiet, confident nod. His phone had buzzed too. He knew. She turned back to the crowd, hundreds of screens glowing like judgmental stars. The old Elise would have panicked. But this wasn't the old Elise. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on Marcus. For a heartbeat, their gazes met. He wore the smirk of a man who thought he'd won something. Elise picked up her prepared speech, then set it aside. "Before I thank my team," she said, voice slicing through the murmurs, "I want to address something." The room tensed. "It seems a story has just been published about my fiancé, Lucas Zhang." Gasps. All around her. Lucas placed a calm hand at her back. He hadn't asked her to speak. He didn't need to. They were a team. "The article," Elise continued, meeting every eye in the room, "concerns a decision Lucas made 15 years ago. One he has never hidden from me." "It's a story about a mistake," Elise said, voice calm and steady. "But what that story leaves out is everything that matters more. It leaves out the years Lucas spent making it right. It leaves out the friendship that rose from the ashes of that moment. It leaves out the humility and grace that shaped the man beside me tonight." She turned toward Lucas, her eyes, so full of love, so unshaken by the spotlight, found his. "I'm marrying a man who is not perfect. I'm marrying a man who's made mistakes, and I'm so deeply grateful for that. Because I am not perfect either, and I've made my share of mistakes too." Her voice softened, but never wavered. Our lives aren't headlines or polished biographies. They're messy, they're layered, and true strength is owning your failures and still choosing to build something beautiful. She glanced out over the crowd, and her eyes stopped on Marcus. The smirk was gone. He looked stunned, disarmed. He had come expecting her to falter, to stumble. He never imagined she would rise. Elise's voice carried through the silent ballroom. "There are those in this world," she said, "who believe power is earned by tearing others down, who see vulnerability as weakness, who operate in shadows, feeding on bitterness and blame. But that isn't strength. That's fear. That's scarcity." She held up the award, just slightly. "True power is this. It's preserving what matters. It's acknowledging pain and loving people, not in spite of their scars, but because of the way they carry them with grace." "Thank you." She stepped back. There was silence, just for a beat, then applause. A single person, then two, then a roar. The room exploded into a standing ovation. It wasn't just for architecture, it was for her resilience, her truth, her bravery. Marcus couldn't move. The sound was crushing, a tidal wave of everything he wasn't. His plan hadn't just failed, it had detonated in his face. He hadn't destroyed Elise or Lucas, he had only revealed his own pettiness, his irrelevance. He thought he'd become the villain in her story. But villains have power. He was nothing more than a footnote. As Elise stood beside the city's most powerful CEO, loved, admired, and unbreakable, Marcus remained in the shadows, watching, forgotten. The fallout from the gala was swift and definitive. The hit piece Marcus had orchestrated was dismantled in real time. Claire's calm, measured takedown didn't just deflect the scandal, it flipped the narrative entirely. Lucas Zhang wasn't a villain now. He was a man of integrity, a man capable of reflection and redemption. But the true spotlight belonged to Elise. She wasn't just praised as a brilliant architect. She became a symbol of dignity, resilience, and fearless truth. In trying to control her story, Marcus had permanently lost control of his own. He fled Singapore the next morning, but the one thing he couldn't escape was himself. Her words, "That is not strength, it is the hollowest form of weakness," echoed endlessly in his mind. Back in Manhattan, his sprawling penthouse felt like a tomb. His company, once the symbol of triumph, felt like a pile of hollow victories. He had spent his life collecting things: money, power, a glamorous girlfriend. But he had built no foundation. He was a high-rise made of mirrors, gleaming, reflective, and utterly empty inside. Rock bottom didn't come as a collapse. It came as silence. He stopped showing up to work, stopped answering calls. He sat alone, city lights blinking far below, and finally faced his own reflection, and the man he had refused to see for years. He saw the fear behind his ambition, the insecurity that made him devalue Elise, the loneliness he had camouflaged with wealth. A month passed. Then it arrived, a simple, cream-colored envelope. No return address, but he didn't need one. Inside was not a letter, but a wedding invitation. Lucas Zhang and Dr. Elise Marlowe request the pleasure of your company. A small, private ceremony at a centuries-old pagoda Elise had helped preserve. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. "Marcus, I don't expect you to come. Truthfully, I don't want you to. But Lucas and I believe that closing a door is not the same as locking it with bitterness. We are moving forward, with light, with joy. We wish you no harm. We only hope, one day, you choose to move forward too. To build something, not for image, but for meaning. That's the only kind of architecture that endures." He'll lead it 10 times. It wasn't a peace offering. It was something rarer. It was release. She wasn't just ending their story, she was handing him the blueprint for a new one. If he dared to build it. Marcus didn't go to the wedding, but that day, he did something else. He sold the penthouse. He stepped down as CEO, giving the reins to his trusted deputy. He sold the watch, the car, the curated persona. And with that money, he began again. He called it the Grove Fund, a small, anonymous foundation, seed capital for young entrepreneurs in rural Vietnam. People with grit and ideas the old Marcus would have sneered at as unscalable. But he didn't want credit. He didn't even put his name on the paperwork. This was never about legacy. It was about rebuilding from scratch, quietly, earnestly. He moved into a modest apartment in an older district of Hanoi. He began visiting historical sites he had once dismissed. He read the books Elise had once begged him to understand. It was excavation work, not of old buildings, but of his own soul. He was trying to understand the man he had been, and the one he might still become. One rainy afternoon, nearly a year later, he sat at a street-side cafe near Hoan Kim Lake, sipping black coffee. A newspaper sat open on his lap, and there they were, a photograph. Elise and Lucas, opening a new community learning center. Their hands linked, her belly round with new life. They were building not just a family, a legacy, a life of meaning. Marcus stared at the image for a long time, but there was no envy, no regret, no ache, just peace. Bittersweet, but real. He had lost Elise. He had lost the fantasy of power. But in the ruins, he had found something better himself. His redemption wouldn't be public, wouldn't be flashy, it would be quiet, it would be hard, and it would take a lifetime. But finally, he understood. That was the only kind of architecture that lasts. And for the first time in his life, Marcus Wolf was ready to build. In the end, this was never a story about who won or who lost. It was a story about worth. The worth we assign to others, and the worth we finally learn to find in ourselves. Elisa's journey wasn't about marrying the city's most powerful CEO. It was about reclaiming her own value. Marcus's? It was about starting over and realizing that the greatest wealth doesn't live in towers. It lives in truth. Sometimes you have to hit bottom to find solid ground. So the story has ended. Our wonderful friends, are you still here with me right now? If you're still here reading these words, then I know something in this story has stirred your heart. Maybe it's the silent grief of missed chances, or the quiet strength it takes to rebuild from ashes. Maybe you've been Elise, underestimated, dismissed, only to rise stronger. Or maybe, just maybe, you've been Marcus, convinced you were winning until you had to confront the truth. Let's pause here and ask ourselves, what is it we're really building in this life? Legacy or image? Connection or control? This story wasn't about a billionaire, a rooftop dinner, or a glamorous twist of fate. It was about the hidden scaffolding of our worth. How easy it is to lose it, how powerful it is to reclaim it. Marcus thought he needed more power, more praise, more sparkle. But in the end, what he needed was less noise, less ego. He needed to listen, to love, to start again, not in marble towers, but in the quiet, humble places of truth. And Elise, she didn't just move on, she moved upward. In value, in grace, in knowing that being seen, truly seen, is the most intimate kind of love. So maybe that's the takeaway, that healing doesn't always look like grand declarations. Sometimes it's saying, I let you go, not in anger, but in peace. Sometimes the greatest power is not needing revenge, but being so whole, you have nothing left to prove. Heterodox writer Anne Lamott once said, grace meets us where we are, but doesn't leave us where it found us. Friends, if this story touched you, even in the smallest way, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Like it. Let someone else feel a little less alone today. And if you're not already, hit that subscribe button, because there are more stories ahead. Ones that heal, ones that challenge, ones that hopefully remind you you are not alone, and the architecture of your soul is worth preserving.